This is Hota. He's 31 years old, owns a car, rents an apartment, has some stocks, a couple funds, and is generally living off his monthly salary. My guy's reading a book, and it mentions that the average net worth of a person his age should be about 75 grand. He looks at what he's got and wonders, how do I calculate that? Assets minus liabilities equals net worth, but what is an asset? Are they just stocks? Bonds? The car? The pack of cigarettes in his pocket? Well, my guy better stay tuned because that's what we're talking about today. You're watching Sekider, and this is episode 5 of our personal finance series, What Are Assets Anyways? For this series, we'll be working out of the textbook Personal Finance by Siegel and Yacht, which you can retrieve an absolutely legal free copy from the open textbook library in the description box below. Also, if you could help me in my goal of getting to 1,000 subscribers by the end of next year, I would be truly grateful. For everyone who's already subscribed, I'd like to thank you from the depths of my being, and I hope that I can continue to bring value to whatever it is you're trying to do with your life. Alright, let's get to it now. Now, before we get into assets, it's important to identify the possible ways that people can acquire capital. The first and foremost common method is through work. The next way is through investing. The final way is through lending of money. Working is essentially the act of selling labor for money. Investing is selling capital, and lending is renting out that capital. Work accrues capital through wages or salaries, investment through profits, dividends, or capital gains, and lending returns capital through interests on the loans. The most important thing to note is that working is the only way to make money without already having it. That's why it's usually only those who are born into wealth who never actually have to work for a wage or a salary. It's also why wealth disparities have far outpaced income disparities over time, but that's not what this video is about. If you do want to read more on that though, I suggest the book Capital in the 21st Century by Thomas Piketty, but I digress. For most of us, our income at this moment in time is coming through work. It's through work that we acquire capital, and it's a surplus of that capital that we trade through lending or investing. So now let's look at the types of assets that we can get with the money that we earn. There are a few ideas of what are and aren't assets floating around in the world, but let's start with what they talk about in the book. Siegel and Yacht define assets as any item with economic value that can be converted to cash. This may sound like it means that anything can be an asset, and in a way that's kind of true. A box of Gatorades aren't assets to customers, but they could be for Pyeongjam owners. Similarly, famous paintings can definitely be considered assets, whereas poster paint Jackson Pollocks by friends back home going stir crazy in lockdown may never create anything worth as much as the canvas that it's actually painted on. Siegel and Yacht identify common assets that one may hold over the course of their life. These are cars, savings accounts, money market accounts, homes, rental properties, and investments in either stocks or bonds. Now, while each of these represent assets, they perform very different functions that the writers identify as being fundamental to assets in general. These functions are as follows: storing wealth, generating income, and reducing expenses. All assets should perform at least one, if not more, of these functions at any given time. So let's talk about function 1. Storing wealth. Alright, so Hota's car is breaking down and he wants to get a new, more fuel efficient one. He looks online and finds a Twizy selling for around 2.7 million won. To finance his purchase, Hota sells his old whip and a few stocks, that way he doesn't have to take on debt unnecessarily. Now let's look at the transaction to better understand how assets can be used to store and return wealth. As mentioned before, Siegel and Yacht suggest that any item with economic value that can be exchanged for cash can be considered an asset, but it doesn't mean that assets store wealth equally. For example, let's think about Hota's car. He bought it in 2010 for 10 million won, and now he's reselling it 10 years later for 2. Because the sale price is significantly lower than the purchase price, this can be considered a capital loss. Conversely, the stock that he sold was a cacao stock which he bought in 2013 at 8만 won and is selling now for 35만 won. This increase of value is what we call a capital gain. With regards to this function, it's clear that the stock which added wealth was much better at storing wealth than the car which reduced it. Does this make the car a bad asset? Some would say yes, but there are 2 functions left, so let's talk about the next one. Generating income. Now, rather than sell the cacao stock, Hota actually had the ability to simply hold onto it for its dividend. Dividends are essentially a payment that comes out of a company's profits that are paid out to their shareholders. Some people, such as retirees, often prioritize assets that pay dividends to supplement their income. Similarly, people profit off their real estate investments through rent payments. Loans themselves return interest, and each of these are examples of how assets can generate income for their owners. With regards to the prior example, Hota stocks clearly provided income through their dividends, but they were more valuable at the moment for their trade value. The car, though, was extremely unlikely to have functioned as an income generator at any point, but it did serve the final asset function extremely well, so let's talk about that. The final argument that Siegel and Yacht make for assets is that assets reduce expenses. This is where the car shines. Hota could always save the money that he would be spending on the new car, but he sees that owning a Twizy EV would drastically cut down on his commuting expenses without forcing him to revert back to taking public transit. This is important to him because time is capital, so owning an EV cuts down on wasting his capital in both the form of time and money. From the book, Figure 2.8 breaks down all of the examples listed above based on how well they perform each function. For example, houses tend to appreciate in price, so buying the house that you will live in will effectively store your wealth while also reducing your expenses by saving you money on rent. Unless you Airbnb a room or something, what they don't do is increase your income. Conversely, investing in stocks doesn't reduce your expenses, but dividend-paying stocks will increase your income while also storing your wealth, provided that you invest in good stocks. One of the key takeaways from this chapter is this. To have value as an investment, an asset must either store wealth or create income, which is also included in reducing expenses. Ideally, the best kind of assets do both. When building your assets, it's important to consider the role which the asset can play in your life, while also considering what kind of asset you need in your life at that time. Siegel and Yacht suggest that you answer a few questions about your personal financial standing. Specifically, what are your assets? How well do your assets store wealth? How well do your assets make income for you? And how do your assets help you reduce your expenses? Another thing you can do is to list your assets in order of their cash or market value, then list them in terms of their degree of liquidity. Which assets do you think you might sell in the next 10 years and why? What assets do you think you would like to acquire and why? Finally, how can you reorganize your budget to make it possible to invest in new assets? Now, before we go, I want to take a second to acknowledge a large and growing community of financial writers and coaches who would argue with some of the points that are made in this book. I'm talking about a school of thought that follows the claim by popular writer Robert Kiyosaki. He argues that an asset is something that puts money in your pocket, whereas a liability is something that takes money out of your pocket. This argument does not consider reduction of expenses as justification for something to be considered a financial asset. And this is a really important perspective because it can change the way that you look at your finances overall. Furthermore, savvy investors consider the importance of opportunity cost. And for many, that means that renting doesn't necessarily need to be considered a negative thing if you can make more money than you lose by putting it to work in the capital markets. Now, how you go about your finances is always up to you. But I hope that this video has helped shed light on the nature of assets and the ways in which their accrual can help you in the long run. If so, please like this video and share it with your friends. Otherwise, please subscribe to the channel and stick around for more how-tos and what-to-dos to make your life easier in the Republic of Korea and beyond. If you're looking for an easy way to immediately generate a return on cash, click through the video above, and I'll see you in a bit.